Hello everyone, Bag here, and welcome to my complete Archer guide. Here we'll take a look at his builds, his teams, his playstyles, and his premium options, so that you can leave this video as a more informed player and puller than when you got here. Timestamps are below if you don't need a kit summary, and with that, let's get into things. Archer is a free 5-star quantum hunt unit with a semi-unique reliance on skill points for his damage output, instead of turns. Here is a summary of his kit. Moving past his basic attack that does nothing special, most of his kit revolves around his skill. This skill is just a large single target nuke, with the special thing about it being that using it does not end his turn. Archer can just keep spamming the skill within a single turn, where he is only stopped if he is out of SP, if all the enemies of a wave dies, or after 5 skills. And you do also have the ability to manually end his turn mid-skill spam, rather than just being forced to go until he can't. Archer also, very importantly, gets a buff of 100% damage bonus after the first and second uses of his skill per turn. So you're incentivized to put as many skills into one turn as you can, so then you get as many fully buffed skills as possible. The catch here, no, not you. The catch is that each skill use costs 2 skill points. So you might be asking, Bag, how are we even gonna get close to 5 skills per turn, when that would cost 10 skill points, and the max SP is 5? Well, Archer has 2 means in his kit to circumvent the SP cap. For one, his first trace does the same thing as Sparkle. It raises the max SP cap to 7. This then means that him and Sparkle on the same team make the SP cap 9. And for fun, an E4 Sparkle brings it up to 10. For the other circumventing SP cap strat, we have to look at his ultimate. His ultimate is a very simple, very large single target damage nuke that also give him 2 charges. These charges are consumed whenever an ally attacks an enemy, where Archer then launches a follow-up attack that recovers a skill point. What's very important to know here is that Archer and his allies can use their ultimates during Archer's turn, which is to say during his skill spamming. This is different than, say, Caster's breath attack, where you can't use allies' ultimates after the breaths start. Here though, it's incredibly important, as it means that you can generate SP for Archer during his turns. The very high energy cost is fine, by the way, as every skill usage from Archer generates 30 energy, so 220 is only 7 skill uses to be at 215 energy, where his follow-ups can then get him to 220. For his traces, his minor traces give damage percent, attack percent, and a relatively small amount of crit rate. His first trace was the SP cap raise that we already talked about. The second trace, however, gives him 1 charge at the start of combat. He also gets 1 charge from the start of combat from his technique, so in total he starts with 2. Combining this with Sparkle's technique that generates 3 SP, or just by having fast supports that don't need to turn 1 skill, and it should be easy to have a lot of SP ready for Archer's first turn. His final trace is a pretty big one. Archer gets a massive 120 crit damage when the team's SP is generated to be 4 or higher. This is a 1-turn buff, so as if you weren't incentivized enough, you need to generate SP to apply this buff for every one of his turns. For leveling priority, his skill, ultimate, and talent are all extremely important to make the most out of his damage. Like I always say, he's a carry, so squeezing the most damage possible out of him is optimal. There are semi-frequent scenarios where you do want to basic attack, so leveling it is smart, but technically not needed. So, Archer's playstyle should be relatively easy to glean from how his kit is designed. With how much damage you get out of Archer in 1 turn, his game plan is to plan around a small amount of turns by giving him as much SP as possible within said turns. The obvious first way to do so is via supports that specialize in generating SP, so Sparkle, Gallagher, Sunday and his Lycone, Hanya, Ranmei's Lycone, and so on. Any support with a damaging ultimate, or a follow-up that can be manually procced, is also useful through being able to generate charge mid-turn for Archer, which, as we touched on before, lets him bypass his already raised SP cap to get closer to 5 skills per turn. But let's say a Sparkle-less Archer starts with max SP, then that's 3 skills, and if he can ult and have both charges consumed, then that's a 4th skill. So to get 5 skills without Sparkle, he needs some other way to generate SP mid-turn besides his team consuming charge. This is part of why Sparkle is so impactful, as her in-turn SP generation with her ultimate doesn't take away from the utility from other supports' charge consumption. And, you know, a cap of 9 SP is a lot easier to play around in general. Although without holding Sunday's Lycone, she does start Archer's turn with 8 SP by skilling to start his turn. Coming off of what was mentioned earlier with working around a few amount of turns, the basic speed tuning is just to give Archer 2 turns per cycle, either through action advancing him with an 161 speed Sparkle or Sunday, or by giving him speed with Hanya, or via well-timed DDD proc. box. You can give him more than 2 turns, but since you, most likely, are not getting more than 20 SP to work with per cycle, it's unlikely that you need that many turns to make the most out of the resources that you can give to Archer. You can instead give Archer SP through giving him non-damaging extra turns. By using RMC in the 3rd team slot, or a -1 speed setup with Sunday, you can waste turns that you don't want to skill spam on by just basic attacking. This gives 1 SP, 20 energy, and a teeny tiny amount of damage. This does mean that the buff from his 3rd trace is very susceptible to run out, so you will need to manually think about reapplying it before his big damage turns start up. With hyperspeed supports like Sunday or Sparkle, you aren't really planning the SP around Archer's turns, but rather theirs. So it's smart to have the rest of your supports as faster than them, so that they can generate SP before Archer's turn starts. And this also gives time for the supports to generate energy for themselves, so that they can more easily ult to consume charge during Archer's turn. Moving on to how to actually plan around his skill spamming within his turn, and well, it's pretty context dependent. A lot of the time, you are running him with Silverwolf or Cypher, if you do have either of them, so the most important thing to consider in this case is to make the most of their respective mechanics. This means targeting the patron enemy to make the most of Cypher's damage accumulation, or targeting whoever Silverwolf has skilled for just plain old big damage. Unlike my GOAT Boothill, you can switch targets between skill uses, so you are not locked into nuking a single enemy for the entire turn. It's entirely valid to first see how his damage is doing at the start of his skill spam, before then deciding who to target with the rest of his skills. Nuking one enemy, rather than spreading out your skills across different enemies, is a double-edged sword. As on one hand, getting rid of enemies means getting rid of their potential CC, you can get rid of their damage for the sake of sustainless runs, and you also just get energy for killing an enemy. But on the other hand, you lose out on the potential energy generation that you get from being hit by said enemy. So you might want to suss out when an enemy has cycled through their energy generating attacks before you decide to delete them from existence. Really, the most important thing to play around is the team's SP. It's really as simple as that. Try, if you can, to not consume charge too quickly if it means overcapping on SP. Save damaging ults to consume charge mid-turn, and of course try to stockpile SP for Archer's turn to get the most fully buffed skill uses. That last part can be a bit complicated, but let's look at the numbers. Archer gets 100 damage bonus after his 1st and 2nd skill. So say you have 7 Archer skills to work around across 2 turns. How should you split those 7 skills between those 2 turns? If you went 2 and 5, you would have a total utilized damage percent of 800%. As, by the way, the damage percent only kicks in after the skill usage, so the skills are fully buffed from the 3rd skill and onwards. But if you instead split it 3 and 4, it's also 800%, as you're clearing the ramp up time in both turns, and the only difference is where you allocate those extra skills afterwards. Either 1 and 2 or 0 and 3. It still equals 3 fully buffed skills either way. But let's say you can't clear that ramp up time in both turns. What if you only have 4 skills to work with across 2 turns? If you split it 1 and 3, you get a total of 300% utilized damage bonus. If you go 2 and 2, you only get 200%. Or lastly, if you go 0 and 4, where we just basic attack on the first turn, then the utilized damage percent goes to 500%, on top of the added bonus of generating an extra SP from the basic attack. So as a last TLDR, prioritize clearing the ramp up time within a single turn, and don't be afraid to basic attack when needed. I'll plug here to subscribe. My coverage on Sarydra and Heislins will start as soon as possible after their info drops, so stick around if you'd like to see that. Pointing out the returning viewer statistic really worked last time. So hey, there's like 200,000 of you that YouTube classifies as a returning viewer from just the last 30 days. So if you are one, then check to see if you're actually subbed. Alright, enough shilling, back to the vid. Next, we get to how to build Archer. For main sets, as a quantum carry who likes to have debuffers on his team, the Genius set is a no-brainer best in slot option. It brings the most out of Silverwolf's buffing, since Death Shred gets stronger the more you stack of it, while still synergizing well with Cypher. And since Archer is quantum, you, well, hopefully won't be bringing him to too many fights that don't have quantum weaknesses on them, while then also not utilizing Silverwolf's implants. The other set that's obvious to consider is Scholar, but not only does its stats just lose to Death Shred in terms of effectiveness, but not buffing his follow-up attacks is also kind of meh, as they are a semi-important part of his overall damage. The Poet set is also somewhat considerable as well, as even though he is too fast to get the full buff, just getting 20 crit rate is still nothing to sneeze at. But yeah, Genius set is the way to go basically every single time. For planers, the main option is Verdant. And while yes, not buffing his ultimate or follow-up makes this set look even worse than Scholar did, especially since he is rather oversaturated in damage percent at base, but he has pretty slim pickings for planers in general, so it's the best he's got. You can also run Salsodo to buff everything besides his skill, since everything else doesn't benefit from his massive skill damage bonus gains, but since his skill is the majority of his damage, it's obviously a worse option by default. For stats, you want a crit body, where crit rate is especially a priority, with how his skills are a single hit, so missing crits would suck on them, and because he gets a lot of crit damage from him himself and the team. Attack boots are easy unless if you're going for the -1 speed setup with Sunday, which can work although it is rather unorthodox. Attack rope, and for the orb, well, due to his high amount of damage percent, attack percent can be a lot more competitive here, but generally damage percent will still be better, even if the gap is a lot smaller. But as always, the real answer here is just to go off of substats. Now for the big relevant question in 3.4, what about his light cones? For those of you stressing about not getting his free light cone by spending 200 pulls in 3.4, you shouldn't be too worried. Yes, obviously his signature is his best light cone, but he is fully usable without it. It gives 16 crit rate, 40 attack percent, and a stacking attack percent up to another 40% by using a skill. The main thing here is that the light cone doesn't solve any problems in his kit. There's no SP generation, no energy regen for more ults, none of that. It is the best damage buff that he can get from his light cones, but the other factor here is that hunt light cones are also just pretty dang good. Cruising is the pinnacle of free-to-play light cone options, and if you can keep up the conditional buff time by killing enemies, then it can be even better than an S5 3.4 Battle Pass alternative. That option has no conditional buffs, however, so for reliability's sake it is still an okay option if you want to spend $50 and 5 patches for a side grade to a free-to-play option. He does have some other signature options as well, thanks to his follow-ups opening a lot of conditional buffs up to him. Ratio signature is the next best thing besides his own signature, as the defense ignore on his follow-ups and conditional buff that relies on debuffs on the enemy both jive well with his general game plan. Topaz's light cone can also be great for its large amount of raw crit value, but stacking up the debuffs with its follow-up attacks might feel a bit clunky to work around. But really, if you don't have any of these options, cruising should still be fine for you, so long as a given fight has random enemies to kill for semi-decent uptime of its 2-turn buff. For teams, we have a teammate tier list ready that I'm assuming most of you have already watched. But for a TLDR, Archer's teams are pretty set in stone. Slot 1 is a main turn giver that generates or at least doesn't spend any SP. The best in slot here is of course Sparkle, then Sunday, and then Hanya. The second slot is mostly for damage amping and SP generation. The best units here are Cypher and Silverwolf. I did a big section on who wins between them in the teammate tier list, but basically Cypher is marginally better so long as you make proper use of her damage accumulation, since she is SP positive and has better debuff uptime. But Silverwolf generally does have marginally better damage amping, while also being definitively better in non-quantum weak fights. So as long as you can play around her occasional skill usage, she can be perfectly competitive with Cypher and should do just fine in any scenario. Other than them, Tribi can work here due to her big buffs and easy charge consumption with her ult and follow-up, and RMC can also work if you play around Mem to give Archer extra turns to basic attack with, or extra clutch turns to clear within a cycle with. You can also mix in multiple units from this third team slot, either in a sustainless team, or if you just don't want to run Hanya, Sunday, or Sparkle. But for the latter case, in-turn SP generation will be an issue, since, as we mentioned earlier, Archer can't get to 5 skills in one turn completely on his own. Lastly, for sustains, Gallagher is the obvious option here with his uber SP generation. Although as a mini addendum to my teammate tier list, I do want to be a bit more fair to Hyacine, since she can hold her signature that gives big vulnerability debuffs, and she can be played completely SP positive if you can manage to just not summon Ika until her ult naturally comes up, or just tank the initial skill usage in exchange for moderate Ika damage. I'd still say Gallagher is more comfy, but if your Hyacine is invested into, then she can be better for raw damage. Other sustains can all do their respective job as normal, although those who need their skill for their utility and sustaining, like Ho-Ho or Fushuan, might be difficult to play around in exchange for their very useful resource utility. So yeah, pretty easy team making. I do want to reiterate from my teammate tier list that Sparkle is not needed to make Archer succeed. She is best in slot for her team slot by far, but Archer can still clear just fine with substitutes. Also, just in general, Sunday's Lycone is a good option to slot in for extra SP. Tingyun with Sunday's Lycone is actually great for SP generation, due to being one of the very few supports with a spammable single target skill and ultimate, although obviously her buffing is worse than any other option in her team slot. It is nice that, overall, Archer uses pretty underused supports in the grand scheme of things, instead of just relying on Robin, Sunday, and Tribi to carry his performance. This lets your other team more easily reach its peak potential, which is a genuine strength of his. Finally, we get to his Eidolons, which are pretty standard, I'd say. His E1 gives the team 2 skill points after his third skill in one turn. Now, the lack of any actual damage buffs might seem underwhelming at first, but an entire extra potential skill every turn is a sizable boost, assuming he's not already reaching 5 skills in a turn. The thing is, even in his best teams, he's gonna have a lot of turns where he doesn't reach 5 skills. So there, getting an entire free fully buffed skill is huge. And if he does reach 5 skills without the E1, it's still a free 2 SP that can give him a head start on funneling his next turn. So this is a pretty good Eidolon then, although I would still say it's far from needed. And if the answer wasn't obvious, Archer is yet another case where his E1 is better than his S1, but the S1 is cheaper. Especially so in this case due to the promotion that they're doing with his light cone. His E2 gives an enemy a quantum implant whenever they are hit by his ultimate, on top of a 20% quantum res shred. So this is just a mini Silverwolf that's baked into an Eidolon. Obviously here, Cypher becomes much better than Silverwolf, but besides that, I would say this is a thoroughly average E2. It is nowhere near how good Finon's E2 is by any means, but 20 res pen is something, assuming you can make good use of it by ulting the right enemies at the right time for proper uptime. His E4 increases the damage dealt by his ultimate by 150%. I mean, meh. His ultimate is a good amount of his damage, but for 5 copies of Archer, or I guess 4 since the first one is free, this is nevertheless very underwhelming. And I would say this reaches the point where it's a lot easier to buff him more substantially by vertically investing into the rest of the team instead. Lastly, his E6 gives 1 SP on Archer's turn start, 20 Death Shred on his skill, and his talent's damage percent now has an extra stack, so he gets up to 300% from his third skill. Honestly, for E6s, this is pretty underwhelming. 100 extra damage percent that doesn't even apply to most of his skills, and 20 Death Shred is just not on the same level of many other E6s, including Saber, who otherwise has pretty mid Eidolons besides her E6. And on that note, that's everything. Like my last vid, I'll be live doing account reviews about an hour after this video comes out, so I'll see you all then. I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Bye!